So now we've got the greater luxury of giving each of the discussants 4 minutes to summarize discussions over the last 2 days. Gideon I was talking to just at lunchtime, and we were saying, Gideon actually said, well, the interesting thing is, what will we be thinking about on Monday on the basis of this conference? I actually said I'll be lucky on Monday if I can remember ever being at this conference, but that's something that happens. But I want to turn to each of the panelists in turn, and I haven't told you this already, but could you perhaps particularly think, what should we take away? What should we be thinking, not just Monday, but perhaps even the Monday after, on the basis of this conference? So there are 4 minutes. Tom's just taken, he still put it there, good man. And I will do it in the order here, which means Liat has got 4 minutes. I might give you 30 seconds extra because you were also a rapporteur. So I'll roll those two together. What a challenge. Yeah. What should we be thinking about, Liat?
Okay, I would like to talk about 2 issues. The first is the concept of crisis. And the second one is the mission that we got when we started, to build a curriculum of training. So what could it be? So first about the concept of crisis, we saw that the crisis is everywhere, in every sphere, in every discipline. I think it is the defining category of our contemporary situation. So what does it mean to ask, is there a crisis in science today? Or in other words, I would like to ask what kind of work this term, crisis, is doing in the construction of this conference narrative. And I don't have time to elaborate it, but I would like to suggest that it functions as an object of knowledge, mark out a moment of truth. We talked a lot about uncovering the truth or see the real things, the real problems. So how far did we get in the direction from truth to quality? And do we still need this notion of crisis? For what? And about the curriculum, I'm an academic director. That's what I do, building courses and curriculum. And I ask myself, hearing all of you, who are we who need to build this curriculum? And who should build this curriculum and for whom? And is there a possibility, like in the example we heard about the food, not to build something for somebody, but to let them, which is always us, of course, to let them build their own training, define their own problems. And I would like to suggest for next Monday and the next weeks, if we can build something that will be an infrastructure. I don't think that we don't have to do anything, but to think about it as infrastructures that can have many kind of forms in many places, dealing with different kind of qualities and different kind of problems and framing problems. So that's it.
Thank you very much indeed. So we should be thinking about crisis. We should be thinking about the relationship between truth and quality in that move, and then infrastructure is the other point you think.
And
okay.
Form. Maybe infrastructure and form.
And form, okay, introduction form. Fantastic. So the points are building up. Of course, I'm going to be asking you the same question in a few moments. But before that, we have Martin, who is going to address a similar issue of what should we be taking away from this meeting. And Matthias and Peter will no doubt speak shortly also.
Thank you. I'm completely out of my depth. When I was in secondary school, I won a debate on a theological question by stating that Jesus said not that you have to tell the truth, but that you should love your neighbor. I'll come back to that. I don't think we've got a crisis of science, but we are in a permanent crisis, and of course science is in that. Peter Collins made a comment. I tried to make a sort of 5 points of our session. Science may be in a sort of growing up process. Andrea said that science may be on the verge of a terminal breakdown. I think that science is neither growing up nor dying. It's only coexisting in a fairly difficult way with other tentatives of hegemony and coercion. It's become powerful. It wasn't at the start, now it is. So, second point, science and social science of unintended effects. Jerry Rabbits made his talk, Unintended Bads of Unintended Goods. The science of bads is not like the science of goods. Science, as a project, was an intended good. It is producing unintended bads. So what do we deduce? Baudrillard, 1976, the inseparability of good and bad. Well, we already knew that. Science quality, what are we caring about? Are we trying to find a new hegemonic concept of quality? Kill ourselves, shoot ourselves in the head fast, because we'll make it worse. Silvio Funtowitz didn't say yesterday that quality is more in the process than in the outcome, but many other people did, and he said that 25 years ago when I visited here the first time. It's a bit like procedural and substantive aspects of justice. They move in a spiral. Spiral of what? Clumsy solutions, legitimacy, science, because it's powerful today, whatever its faults and lack of quality, it's a self-justifying enterprise, even though individual scientists feel they have no power and no status. Well, like people in the church 500 years ago. Might is right. Science is destroying dignity despite itself, despite its ideals several hundred years ago. How can we restore countervailing tendencies? I'm making very abstract statements. There were lots of examples of that question during the 2 days. It's never been possible to separate science from society. So why should we even think of that? Many people said it, but how can we have been so silly? Lots of examples of hybridizations. Was there any science that wasn't a hybrid process? Are we talking about hybridization as a solution or simply as a variety of situations? I remember Michael Thompson and Steve Rayner, the concept of clumsy solutions, the same type of thing. We need clumsy solutions in order to avoid evil, with all respect to Hannah Arendt. So we had suggestions about taking seriously that we need to rebuild, restructure science policy dialogue as if it never existed, but just in different ways. But it does need to be seen as a fundamental permanent process. Construct dialogue, challenge dialogue, rebuild dialogue. How can we say that power isn't on the agenda? It's always present. How can we even think that power isn't a question? I know, I've worked in the European space for 20 years, and you never talk about power in workshops. That's why I'm never invited to workshops anymore. Irwin gave a good talk on craft skills with numbers. There were numbers running wild, there were others running across the screen. There are good numbers, maybe, and good use of numbers. Are there good numbers, or is it like a good dinner? There is a good relationship with numbers, and we have to build it, we have to entertain it, we have to invite people, we have to rest dignified. So for me, I don't know, look, that's my gong, and I've got hegemony.
There's also a hammer. Yeah.
There's only one thing left to say. Everything that we are concerned about is in what ways we do or think we should or might care, which means how do we construct honorable relations between ourselves, with others, with the world. We're still not working it out. That's the human condition, and science doesn't have any monopoly on that.
Thank you, Roger. Okay, the list is piling up of things to think about. We have power, hybridization, science society, hegemony, legitimacy. Daniela, what are you going to add to the list of things for people to think about?
I think I might be a bit redundant. There's no harm in that? Okay, good. Well, this was a very new experience for me, so it was interesting but rather overwhelming. But I try and filter it through my own experience and interests, and so here are my comments. First, can we, as scientists or people working in science, make the effort to move from self-consciousness to true self-reflexivity? Because that seems to be a constant challenge for all of us, as I gave my examples, but I think from what I'm hearing, it's still a challenge for everyone. And how can we recognize and continually address power relationships, what you were talking about? Because this, again, is another point that recurs again and again in our research, in our relationship with our colleagues and our institutions and with the public. So the ideas of humility and empathy and capacity to listen are all critical ones that we all would check the boxes for, but how skilled are we with those practices? And perhaps that's something that could be developed further as part of scientific training. And how can we develop better partnerships with the public? And one suggestion I have is to support public practice of interaction and dialogue, whether it's amongst the public themselves or with other outside experts or visitors or whatever, because the experience of working together is becoming more and more foreign to many of us. We're living much more, at least in the United States, we have this myth of individuality, and we have a very hard time imagining that any problems can be solved by talking to each other, whereas all the evidence I've seen is that the only way we're going to solve our problems is by talking to each other and by joining together. And I think in terms of citizen science or whatever participatory partnerships you have with the public, that is where the public will also find its power, is if they have the capacity or we have the capacity to work together, to talk to each other and to talk to experts. A couple of other points that came up in my mind during a couple of the sessions: procedural justice, very, very important in partnerships with the public, so that the public has access to continuing to having a say in what is happening in terms of a scientific technology or scientific research, so that they are not brought in the beginning, check off the boxes, sign off on something, and then you just suffer the consequences, that it's an ongoing dialogue again. So procedural justice is very important. And that we all remember that this is an iterative process. I mean, science is built, as we all know, with these little steps, as I think Dorothy's or someone's film showed, these little small steps, and we all build on that. And so partnerships with the public should also be recognized as taking small steps, and that it needs to be iterative, and we need to practice that as well. And finally, one suggestion that we all take back to our institutions is that we really need to have the reward system changed in science, because without that change in our reward system, the structure of the professional organizations, we are all, no matter what we believe, we are all compelled to move in this other direction. That wasn't my last point. My last point is that this is sort of my hobby horse for the last 2 days, is that this is a really fantastic group, and the drummer's very good as well. But I think it's very important that, in keeping with the PNS spirit, that PNS practitioners try and make your own values more explicit, and perhaps the values of the group more explicit, because unspoken values have gone on constantly: the goods, the bads, the evil, the progress versus no progress. But if we don't give the example of making that explicit, then what are we to say anyone else should? So, thank you.